from the beginning, even though I do mixed methods research. And so I got to concentrate in stats and really fell in love with it then. And then I was trying to figure out what to do next. And I've realized with my mentor, Lindsay Chase Lansdale, that a number of people in the field have found that they start with a clinical passion, and then they realize that their interest, even though they greatly love and value working one-on-one individually, they want to make broader systemic change. And so I learned about the field of public policy, and Lindsay had just gone there and was one of the first developmental psychologists on a policy school faculty. So I took a leap of faith, and it turned out to suit me well because I was able to study many disciplines and many methods, and have really taken that forward through my career. And then I spent 2 decades at UIC and the University of Illinois system. I was at a policy institute that covers all 3 of our campuses, so Urbana-Champaign, Chicago, and Springfield. And we have faculty with joint appointments in departments. So we all had tenure in the institute and tenure in a department. And my department was sociology at UIC. So I'm really excited about being at the Picard Center to bring what I learned from my collaborators in many research teams, and then moving into more formal roles in faculty research development, most recently chairing social science research in our college. And, you know, pay forward what I learned from mentors in terms of seeking and receiving federal funding. So I'm going to feature 2 projects that came out of some of these collaborations today. And just before I do that, I thought I'd talk about the Picard Center and its goals. I know some of you are very well connected already, and we hope more of you will be over time. So we really have a core mission of working toward ensuring all children have a strong start and continuous support to excel in school and life. You may know we've been doing ongoing classroom observations in early childhood, preschool, and centers for a number of years now, thousands of observations a year. So it's just so impressive what the staff have been doing there. LDOE asked Picard Center to be a partner as they're extending to kindergarten to 2nd grade classrooms. So we're doing that now. We have since 2002 conducted the biennial Caring Communities Youth Surveys in schools across the state. So that assesses aspects of behavioral health. And we, Paula Zena, who I know some of you are connected to, has been working on the Adverse Childhood Experiences Task Force at UL Lafayette. So that's a taste of what we've been doing most recently. And I'm here to help the Picard Center continue to grow as being a leading university level research center, developing rigorous, innovative, and actionable knowledge in support of those missions. So being a research incubator for folks like all of you, engaging local partners like schools and parishes and agencies. Much of my work has been collaborative, including with school districts. I won't feature that as much today, but happy to talk about that in our dialogue. Expand our externally funded research portfolio, including from federal agencies and national foundations, and enhancing our national visibility. And I'll talk about a conference just as a preview in just a second. So we're gearing up toward engaging many of you in seminar series and working groups and research development. And I'm happy to hear ideas. I'll pause in a second if there's any dialogue we want to have, but feel free to reach out to me at any time. And the things I thought I'd feature, I realized as I was coming to UL Lafayette that the university wasn't yet a member of ICPSR, the Inter-University Consortium of Political and Social Research. And so my teams use dozens of data sets from ICPSR. So it's important for me to be sure that we became a member. And it also lets us interact with this national group of scholars at other universities. And we'll host an introductory workshop this fall, but I've got a few of the examples of archives there, like child and family data, education data, the Resource Center for Minority Data, and there's also individual data sets. So my teams have been using Head Start surveys, for instance, and other early childcare surveys that are archived here. And there's also training opportunities and classroom exercises. So if you're teaching and want to integrate data, or you're interested in another place to get training, they have a terrific Summer Institute. We'll also be sending out a call for working groups soon to engage faculty, and are working with one of the national mentors that I worked with at University of Illinois at Chicago to help folks think about setting a research agenda at the end of the fall and then implement that throughout the spring. So watch for more on that. And if you're a student or undergrad or graduate student, we'll be circulating something about someone to join us in relation to systematic literature search and grant proofing. There are other individual projects that have opportunities, such as in coding data for quantitative research. And we also do qualitative research at the center and in my teams. And then the conference I mentioned, you may know Society for Research on Adolescents will be in New Orleans in March. So, and the submission deadline is now just next week. So it would be a really quick turnaround, but you can submit an individual paper or a poster. So if your weekend allows, there's still some time. I was grateful to be the co-chair with Paige Harden here for 2020, but we were one of the first conferences that had to cancel due to COVID. And so we'll be featuring some of the pieces of the 2020 conference that couldn't take place as our colleagues are putting together this fabulous conference on redefining possibilities and amplifying marginalized voices. So I encourage you to head over if you do research on adolescents, even if you're not presenting. So I'll pause there. Anyone want to ask me a question or share anything about P-Card Center before I pivot to my own work?
Rachel, I had a question about SRA. I think from my understanding that the population, if you in terms of participant subjects, can we include college sample 22 or younger?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to know.
When we were planning the conference, we said, should we define, does SRA formally define in any way, just to confirm, and there's not. It's very much investigator driven, and emerging adulthood is an aspect of research that many SRA members do. Great.
That's
okay.
Younger, right?
I'm sorry?
Is it 22 and younger?
Yeah.
Point. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm going to talk about then two pieces of my research, and I called it scaling measurement for an overarching title. So one of my passions has been in measurement theory and psychometrics. And these two studies, the first is not psychometric, it's more like social psychology, I would place it. And then the second one is more psychometric. So I just wanted to give a taste of these two strands of research, which are very much part of my current work. And both of them have a nice collaborative frame that I wanted to share as well. So this project, Skin Tone Identities and Inequalities project, started when we had a visiting assistant professor who was actually there when I was on sabbatical to teach our grad stat sequence, and a brand new graduate student. And when I came back from sabbatical, we started talking about some shared interests. And we designed a supervised research study for 6 undergraduates. Some of them continued on when we collected pilot data the next summer. And then we wrote an NSF proposal with that data. And we were super excited, and it was totally unexpected that we were funded right away. So we had to start doing what we had proposed. And the graduate student working with us stayed on as a project coordinator, and one of the undergrads who had graduated came on board as assistant and then became the co-coordinator of the project. She's getting ready for grad school, and over half dozen undergrads work on the project. And in my broader work, we're looking at snap judgments of other aspects of appearance, but this project focuses on skin tone. So I've been doing that work. My colleague had been studying colorism, and the graduate student had looked at multiracial identities in her senior thesis. And as we were brainstorming, we realized that there was a lot of work to be done on basic measurement of skin color. And there were debates between social scientists who thought that you couldn't use a instrument, a physical instrument to measure skin color because it wouldn't approximate how humans perceived people's skin colors. So our proposal aimed to look at some modern strategies. We knew there were various human rating scales. So I've got some of them here. The Massey Martin was one of the earliest. Perla came later with studies for Latin American countries. And then the one on the bottom is from something L'Oreal developed to market and think about diverse skin tones. And they used a global sample to come up with this array in the bottom left. So we're using that one in our most recent work. There's 66 swatches there. And on the right are some instruments. So we had to learn some aspects of color science to move this project forward, which has been fun collaborations with scientists in chemistry and biology and even physics, because these measure the reflectance of light off the skin, and they give a measurement in color spaces, including lightness to darkness and aspects of pinkness and yellowness. So you get a 3-dimensional portrait, more like L'Oreal's, rather than Massey Martin, which started just lightness to darkness. And these instruments are cheaper and smaller. I didn't show the smallest one that we're using, but it's just like a little circle. So you could use them out in the field. And so we aim to look and see just how consistent are these measures, including do 2 humans rate in similar ways? How comparable are they to each other? So can those instruments replicate what humans see? And are they socially meaningful? Do they relate to aspects of identities and inequalities? And so we have a paper right now that's about just at the end of the publishing stage with our pilot data, which included 46 UIC students intentionally selected for diversity. And we had a screener to get range of skin tone. Also, when COVID happened, we started doing some online research, and we chose a rating pool prolific that's designed for academic scholars. And so that let us have raters really cover cells of gender and racial ethnic identity. And then, and that lets us see if there's an interaction between rater and the target's race ethnicity. And then in our pilot study, one of our undergrads who identified as Latina selected a range of stock photos by perception of race, ethnicity, and skin color. And in our NSF project, we're drawing on the Chicago Face data set, which Debbie Ma and colleagues put together. And you can see that they had people sit with the same clothes and background, and they did a range of expressions. If you're doing work related to social psych, this database is used in a number of other studies. We used it to select a subset of photos that again ranged for gender, race, ethnicity, and skin tone. So we took the Adobe Photoshop skin tone of the photos and were able to get a range of lightness to darkness and pinkness and yellowness. So our major findings on that first question, we saw that not only were multiple readings from the instruments highly consistent with one another, which we would expect based on how they're developed, but also on the right that humans were perhaps surprisingly consistent to one another. So this would counter what some social scientists have thought, that humans see things very differently. And with the online pool, we saw that this high consistency was there across the racial ethnic identification of the rater and the target. The only place where ICCs were lower was for ratings of photos of people who identified as white. And there we had a very constrained range. So they're in a very smaller slice of the lightest range. So that answered our first research question. And then we also looked at associations between the instrument readings and the human ratings. So this LABI-L on the x-axis is the lightness to darkness reading from an instrument. It was the bottom when I showed the LABI. And then the y-axis is human ratings aggregated across all the raters we had from lightest to darkest at the top. And LABI-L star goes from dark to light. So that's why it's, sloping downward, but it's a correlation of -0.92. So very highly correlated between the lightness to darkness that humans see and what the instrument reads. So color scientists would have expected that because they designed color science to replicate human vision. But this is surprising from the aspect of social science, where there's been an assumption that many other cues we see might obscure, how we're rating skin tone. And we feel like there's lots more to be done still there, manipulating photos, for instance, in relation to facial features that signal ethnicity or SES and the skin darkness. But this finding, and we see it with other data that we have, suggests that if you were focused on lightness to darkness, you might use that single reading from the smallest colorimeter and get a good approximation of lightness to darkness of what people see. Now, pinkness and yellowness is much more complicated. It's been much less studied, and I'm not going to show you all our results there, but they're fascinating three-dimensional relationship between lightness to darkness and pinkness and yellowness in a range of human skin tones, like all of the Chicago Face Database photos. So we're still working on that undertone piece. And then the last thing I'll mention from our findings, and I'll pause, is we also, in that online prolific survey, and to look at that meaningfulness question, we asked raters to guess the photographed person's likelihood of being discriminated against when trying to get a job, being arrested after being stopped for speeding, and having a doctor take their symptoms seriously. And we asked this around the last week of 2019 because we wanted people to think pre-COVID. And so we asked them to think of something that was going on around that time and think about that time, when people were still out and about in the world. And you can see that these associations are strong as well, around the 0.85 range. And this is the case even when we took different people who rated each. So we took the people who in the prolific survey were randomized to first rate skin tone, and those who were randomized to first rate social experiences. And we used those two sets ratings. So these aren't the same people rating the photos these ways. These are two different sets of people saying, I think this is going to be this person's experience, and this is how I perceive their skin color. And I realize we have N equals 39. I pulled this out to share with you. So that's actually our prolific sample. So that N looks like it's might not be right. Okay. So, and this builds on the existing colorism literature in the sense that much of that is self-report about own discrimination rather than this other perception of likely discrimination. So I'll pause there. Anyone want to ask questions or share? If I don't know how much social psychology is part of your areas in your department, but happy to answer questions or brainstorm ideas before I go to the other topic. Yep.
Dr. Gordon, thanks. I'm actually one of the social psych professors here.
Okay.
So nice to meet you. And actually
too.
a couple of my students are here too.
Awesome.
So I guess I'm just curious, like what was the, and maybe I missed this, I apologize. But what was the, I guess, intention of, developing this? Is it to sort of assess things like, discrimination or potential for discrimination?
Yes, so we have interest in that application, and we've been engaging both with student organizations at UIC and some of our outside colleagues. So for instance, my collaborator, Amelia Brannigan, is the visiting assistant. Now she's just being promoted to associate professor at University of Maryland, but she has colleagues who work with the police department. So it could be another way to capture aspects of systemic racism, the kind of been arrested after being stopped for speeding could be an application in that context. So I would say in my policy intersection work, there are some stakeholders for whom an instrument reading of skin color might have more validity for them than human perception of skin color. And in some contexts, it would be the reverse. So we're hopeful that both will give more tools to engage in conversation and develop evidence and knowledge in relation to skin color.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Rachel, the agreement in terms of rating across machine and people, pretty amazing. It's pretty impressive. But however, the agreement, I'm more interested in terms of the variability in the differences, how the perception could be different across individuals, and how that variance would be, or variability would be related to individual differences, any dispositional factors or anything like that. That's really the intention of why conducting this research, right?
Well, that is an important additional research question. And you're leading me to think that one of the things that we've talked about and are doing in another project is looking at those off diagonals, who perceives differently. And those can be examined deeply, those cases. There can be qualitative conversation about those cases. So for sure, that is interesting. Our focus for this project and what NSF funded us to do was the flip side, right? How consistent are they with each other? We're funded from the Statistics and Methodology program at NSF. So really to help field researchers make decisions about, if I'm doing work on skin color, could I use an instrument? When could I use an instrument? And then if I wanted human ratings, is there a difference among the choices that I showed? So for NSF, we're focusing on that lens, but we agree completely. Those differences are important to study too. And I should just mention, we had our project call this morning. So what we're doing right now is starting to look at some ways to do international work. The Chicago Face database extended itself and gathered photos in India, for instance. And Prolific has raters in some other countries, only OECD. So for instance, in Mexico, and recent immigrants to the US from other countries. So we're thinking about that to look at some difference in the way colorism operates in India or Brazil relative to the US, Japan, China, you know, and skin lightening. So, so we want to, that's one of our next steps, I guess I should say.
Very exciting, not only individual differences, but also cultural differences.
Yes, right.
Really exciting. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a quick question, and I'm
Sure.
pretty sure I probably have missed it. How many points is the human rating?
The human rating, yeah, so this one is 10 points, the Perla. And it's these, yeah, I guess we didn't get anyone in the 11th because that looks like 10 points. Yeah, so it must have averaged only to 10. We didn't have anyone who was in that very darkest 11. Yeah, and then the L'Oreal has 66 swatches down here, and it's hard to see on the screen, but they go in 11 columns of lightness to darkness, and then they range from pinker at the top to yellower at the bottom. So they better cover multi-dimensional skin diversity than the original scales.
So am I right in understanding that your data show that even 10 points would be, I mean, I know that you're testing the other way around, like whether your measurement, your instrument is consistent with human rating, but can I say that like 10 points will be sufficient if I administer a survey asking for skin color perception? Is 10 points showing enough evidence that it's kind of accurate?
So I would answer that in two ways. One, the L star down here is continuous. So, you know, and they're correlated at 0.92. So they're sharing a lot of variance, even though on the y-axis, we were restricted to the 11 Perla choices. The other thing I would say though, is that what I've learned in color science, which is really cool, is they have a concept of just noticeable difference. So what is a difference in color that's just noticeable to humans? And L'Oreal designed their 66 swatches with that in mind. And we've confirmed it with taking Adobe Photoshop readings of these swatches. So the swatches are just noticeably different from one another. And they had a global pool of people from Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, the US, and used color science readings to come up with this. Now, that doesn't mean it's not perfect. And I think there's some new work that's actually added a few darker shades to it. But that they have the 1 to 11 also on lightness to darkness dimension.
Thank you. And I want to add, you know, just to let the audience know that y'all could unmute yourself and ask questions. Even students, feel free to ask questions. It's not limited to faculty. Actually, students are very encouraged to ask questions. If you're too shy to speak, you can always use the chat box. And I'm sure Dr. Gordon will read the chat box, or I can help relay that message.
Yeah, definitely. And I can't see everyone on my screen, so please do help me if someone's got a hand up or chats a question. And this project and the next one I talk about engaged lots of undergraduate and graduate students. So I really welcome your questions and feedback. So are there any other questions, or should I go on to the next topic?
Seems like we don't have other questions at this moment.
Okay. So this project is the observing classrooms, and it was one of the things that attracted me to Picard Center. I mentioned all the observations that they're doing, and they're using measure that I'll talk about in a second. One of the projects I led at our Policy Institute, we had some seed funding for projects, and I led one called Early Investments Initiative, where we brought together faculty and students from their Urbana-Champaign and Chicago campuses. And the work I'm going to talk about today was collaborative with a new assistant professor when we started this project in psychology at UIC. She's now just become an associate professor, and 2 senior faculty in educational psychology in our College of Education at UIC. And we collaborated with undergraduates to gather data in a child development lab, much like our early childhood lab here at UL Lafayette, and a center in Chicago. And we gathered streams of video in a way I'll tell you about in a second, and then rated those videos. So some of the undergrads were trained in that observational rating protocol, and some managed video collection and processing. We again had a student who had recently graduated and served as the project coordinator before she went on to grad school. And 3 undergraduates wrote honors college theses from the project. And we were grateful to get a IES grant that relates to this project, and used our preliminary data and then a next generation video collection. And we're looking there at emotion focused aspects of teaching. So Kate Zinzer is my colleague at UIC, and our other collaborator is Tim Kirby at George Mason University. And so the purpose of this project, we were thinking about the great investments that have been taking place in early childhood, and those have sensibly led stakeholders to want to ensure that when we're paying for kids with taxpayer dollars to attend early childhood, that those settings are high quality. Of course, what we mean by high quality becomes very difficult quickly to define, lots of different perspectives on it. And what we've seen happen is that certain observational measures have been adopted for that monitoring purpose. And this is a very authentic window into quality. Observers go in and watch and rate what's happening in the classroom, but it's one slice and definition of quality. So that's one challenge with it. It's also a place in which we might have concerns about inter-rater reliability, and also with fluctuations in quality within and between days, because for monitoring, an observer usually goes in for one morning of one day. And the site may get lucky and get a day when quality is really high, or they may get unlucky and get a day when quality is lower. So for instance, some other research has shown that when teachers are teaching about science, they ask more open-ended questions and they score higher on the instructional support aspect of this measure. And similarly with inter-rater reliability, you may get lucky and get a rater who tends to score higher, or you may get unlucky and get a rater who tends to score lower, so lenient or harsher. And then the degree to which the items cover the whole dimension is important, because if we're not covering the whole dimension, we limit precision for those who aren't well targeted by the measure. And one of my goals in my work has been to aim to translate some of those psychometric concepts, like the one I just mentioned, so that stakeholders in policy and practice can understand and use them. And I'll show you how we've done that with a ruler analogy, and we've done that with the school district I collaborate. Some of it is in a work in progress. Not everything I'm going to show you today is user-friendly for non-academic audiences, but that is definitely our goal. And then, at the bottom, most of these tools that were adopted, including the one I'm going to talk about, it was created in an NICHD funded study of early childhood. It was created as part of that study. So the evidence about it was limited. But when stakeholders wanted to monitor the investments, they look to see what's the best available. And this was viewed as the best available, even though it wasn't developed for that purpose. Okay, so a little bit more about the measure, the class pre-K. It has three main dimensions. The instructional support that I mentioned a second ago, with the open-ended questions being a hallmark of higher instructional support, the degree of emotional support for children, and then the organization of the classroom. You know, do the clocks run on time? Are kids doing activities frequently? Are they waiting in line frequently? And those. And I show a couple of graphs to show that this measure has been adopted by many states in their quality rating and improvement systems, as well as their state-funded pre-K programs. And I don't have here, but Head Start adopted the class pre-K in all Head Start funded classrooms as well. And those who score below a certain cutoff need to recompete for Head Start funding. So many programs have lost funding because they haven't met that cutoff. So there's a terrific piece by Andy Mashburn that reviewed the evidence for those uses and found that there were holes in a lot of that evidence for this particular use. So our study was aiming to add to that evidence. So as I mentioned, we used streams of video. We collected full days and weeks, and we were asking about the inter-rater reliability, the variation within classrooms, and the precision of estimates. And I'm going to show some results from the many-facet Roche model. So if you've been exposed to item response theory, this is like a 1PL model where the discriminations are held equal. If you haven't been exposed to item response theory, it's analogous to a factor analytic model for categorical items. And we have some new work related to that intimate relationship between the two. If you're interested, I'd be happy to share it. So our sample was 10 classrooms. They had 13 to 20 children in them, primarily age 3 to 5, so preschool age classrooms. They were in 2 childcare centers, a small city and a large city. And these are ranges of the classroom level percentages. So no classroom had all of these percentages that I have here, but this is the maximum percentage of children who identified with each ethnicity across the classrooms. And we gathered data between the streams of video between 2015 and 2017. And we used 2 videos, video cameras. The top one on the right is a panoramic view, and the one on the bottom right is a close-up view. And the teacher wears a Bluetooth microphone that the swivel tracks to. And this swivel has recently, through COVID, become very widely used for virtual teaching since our work. And all of the children had parents consenting to collecting the video across all the classrooms. And then we worked with our partners in information technology to store it on a secure server for the life of the project, and then destroyed at the end. So the cameras were on from arrival to nap time. And in 9 classrooms, we gathered video Monday through Friday. In 1 classroom, we collected video every Friday for 14 weeks. So we were able to look both within a week variation and then same day across week variation. Our team then, once we had the video screens, inventoried them into 5-minute segments for codability, like the children are in the room and the video was functional. The earliest stage swivel, the Bluetooth would sometimes break and it'd be looking at the wall. So we had to fix that over time, and their technology has since gotten better. We then looked for adjacent sets of 3 5-minute intervals, so a 15-minute segment that were all codable. And this resulted in 425 15-minute occasions from 58 days. And we had 14 raters, 5 faculty. I bolded 9 students. They were mostly undergraduate students, many of them from psychology, and they were trained to certification following the class pre-K guidelines. And our design was partially crossed. So all of the raters scored some of the occasions, and pairs or triplets scored the other occasions. And that's important for the many-facet Roche model that I'll show you to allow connectedness across the raters. Any questions about the data before I look at the results? Okay, so the inter-rater reliability, if you use observational measures, you may know that a within one definition of reliability is common. So this is a 7-point scale, the class pre-K. So you rate on items, and the coders have a manual, and they have narrative descriptions of each of these, well, main points on the 7-point level. And then they have to put together what they see across that whole 15, sometimes it's a 20-minute segment, to match up to one of those narrative descriptions and give a score of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. That's hard to do. The manual says never score without the manual in front of you. And it's very hard for many of us, myself included, to get, reliable on the system. So exact reliability would say you and I have to both be a 5 and we agree. Within one says I could be a 5 and you could be a 4, 5, or 6 and we agree. And that within one makes it easier to achieve agreement on this type of rating system. It may be fine for certain uses like formative feedback, but it may not be precise enough for policy uses I was talking about. So you can see that 3-point scale range on a 7-point scale is almost half of the whole range of the scale. And so in our data, we found within one reliability was in accepted levels, and at the levels of the Teachstone requirements, but exact agreement was much lower, sometimes as low as 26%. And this replicates the limited published data about exact agreement. When Head Start staff were first being trained, they also saw exact agreement in the range of 30 to 54%. So we use the many-facet Roche model as another window into this issue, and it can separate the variation due to raters and the variation due to occasions, or the within and between day variation, and give some more detailed results. So we have a open access article from our emotion-focused teaching work that gives a pedagogical introduction to this model as well. So I'm happy to email that afterwards if folks are interested in it. I would chat it, but I won't be able to get away from my screen right now and pause. But we saw the rater variation in these data. So I'll just walk you through it on this is a type of graph that you can get from the many-facet Roche model. And many people find it facilitates thinking about how different aspects of a rating environment matter for scores. The neat thing about the model is the things that are being rated, like occasions, are put on the same scale, same latent scale as the items and the raters. So the occasions are on the left. That's the distribution of the 480 some occasions. And the items are in the middle. So these are the 3 items of instructional support, and I'll talk about them more in a second. But these are the raters. So those are our 14, each dot is a rater. And if the raters scored the items equivalently, they have the same harshness or leniency, they'd all line up on that dashed horizontal line. But we can see they spread out. They're spread out about twice the occasion standard deviation. And the other neat thing about the mini-facet Roche model is the systematic aspects of rater variance we can adjust for. Non-systematic, we can't. So we need to probe in the way I was responding to Hung Chu's question. You know, we've done this. You can look at instances that differ and, you know, really pull them apart and understand them. And the data will give you those. But the systematic differences can be adjusted for. So this graph shows the adjusted scores on the y-axis and the observed scores on the x-axis. And you can see that the adjusted scores differ from observed scores by as much as a point. So one of our recommendations is to help people use and think about these kinds of models because the adjusted scores would be preferable for many uses to the unadjusted scores. Then the within and between day fluctuations, we looked at in a similar way and identified these as well. So here we first visualized the variation in the instructional support scores. So the 10 classrooms are on the x-axis. And the blue dots are the range across all the occasions in that classroom of its scores on instructional support. And the X, the red X, is the average. So you can see visibly variation within each of the classrooms. I just talked through that. And again, this is after adjusting for the rater variation. So it's, you know, really focusing in on the occasion variation. And we conducted also what some of you may be familiar with, a generalizability study, which steps off from analysis of variance. And a quarter to a third of the variation was due to this occasion main effect. So the important takeaway there for stakeholders is it does matter quite a lot when an occasion occurs. And that's it's important for research, right? Because we know if we go in for a single snapshot, that's not a complete picture of a child's experience or a teacher's quality. Similarly for other monitoring uses. Okay, and then our last topic, and I know this one's a lot, so I will have a little bit of time to go back and answer questions, but I'll get to through our last topic. So the precision of estimation. And you can, I'm going to box some things so you can see really that the scores for instructional support are concentrated at the bottom end of this 1 to 7 scale on the y-axis. So you can see where their averages are concentrated. There are a few scores above 3 and none above 5. And this is consistent with what we see nationally. The scores average low on instructional support. The measure developers, you know, we can think of this as aspirational. It's where we would like instruction to be in classrooms. But if we're not precisely estimating where they're coming from or targeting current classrooms, we're not getting a precise estimate of their quality level. And again, that's a concern for policy use where you're using a strict cutoff and a score as though it doesn't have measurement error around it. So those Head Start classrooms that had to recompete and lost funding were being based on their actual score, not a score with an error band around it. So I think this is the last thing I'll show, but the where the items are located, the CD, LM, and QF. We'd like the items to array along that item line like a ruler. And if we wanted to be at a cutoff like the policy is, we'd really like our items focused there. So we had really high precision at that point. They are focused there in the in this measure, although if you look at the occasion distribution, they're not targeted in the middle, they're targeted at the highest level of the occasion distribution. And there's very few ticks because we're concentrated into the 1 to 3 range. We don't go up to the full 7. And I'm going to jump to the very last point here so that we can talk. So this is just showing the test information function if you're a psychometrician. And the main point is at the bottom of this slide that we only really have enough precision to group occasions into broadly low, middle, and high. We don't have enough precision to say really precisely where they are on that 1 to 7 continuum, which is being used for the cutoff scores. So I'll stop there. I'll just put our conclusions up there and see if, I think we've got like 7 minutes for a few questions on this topic.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Do y'all have a
Very,
Yeah, go ahead.
this is a very basic question. I just do not understand what it means by being aspirational.
It means something, a place we'd like the classrooms to get to, but very few of them are there right now. So, and you know, that is interesting as people have talked about this finding in the field and the broad finding of the lower scores in instructional support. We can also think about a preschool classroom and the supports children might need, like the emotional support and the varieties of activities. So that we might want that highest instructional support just for a small portion of each day and varied across days. Many of us can't have, you know, the highest degree of learning from 9 to 5, right? We need to take breaks, we need variety. So it's both aspirational in the sense that it's really pushing to the what's hardest for teachers to do, and it may not be something that we would want them to be doing all day, every day.
Thank you.
I was going to ask if you have a course in measurement. I remember we talked a little bit about your stat sequence, because this may be newer if you don't have a class in psychometrics, and especially IRT. Many programs don't have a full class in psychometrics. So, you know, we're hoping to share more in our team to make it accessible to the field.
Yeah, Dr. Brown probably could answer that. I think we don't have we have a psychological measurement class, but that's not psychometric focus, right? Yeah, I never taught that, so I don't know.
There's
in all honesty,
yeah, sorry, this is Dr. Stanos. There's a it's sort of shared. So the first unit of it is not on testing administration and stuff. The first unit of it is on psychometric theory. And then after that, the students also have to learn, you know, how to administer score, give feedback, all of that. So it's
Gotcha.
probably a third of the course.
Well, I'll chat our paper, and if anyone's interested in it, I'm happy to talk more. Any broad questions for me before I leave for the last 5 minutes or 3 minutes?
I do have a question. Again, I think I may have missed it. You mentioned like the observation, like the rating, there are different facets or different areas of things that the raters rate. So instructional support is one of them. What are the
Yes.
other ones that were observed?
Emotional support and classroom organization. So I'm trying to get back. So like positive affect would be an example in emotional support. The degree to which the teacher calls the children by name is an aspect of emotional support. And then classroom organization is more that there's been concern. So I came back to it here. Sorry, it's small down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's positive climate, negative climate, teacher sensitivity and regard for student perspectives and emotional support. And then classroom organization is behavioral management, productivity, which is more like, are the kids not standing around a lot in line? You know, do they have things to do, including if it's structured play or center time? Are there, is the teacher using some kind of schedule and kind of a planfulness throughout the day?
So with your data, is it suggesting that this is a valid tool, or like for future researchers, do they take the set and just apply, like they can confidently use these dimensions to assess a classroom?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The last slide I was on, our team working with the school district has really been embracing the idea of continuous measure development and working collaboratively to be able to achieve that continuous improvement with the measure. So the latest, measurement theory thinks about multiple aspects of validity that are continuously building in evidence and that we want to replicate locally. So we try not to say that the instrument is valid or not, but that we have, right now, we do not have sufficient evidence of validity for a high stakes policy and practice purpose for this measure. It may have enough validity evidence for formative assessment, for coaching feedback, and those kind of purposes. It's probably too imprecise for many research purposes, but again, a qualitative study, it may be sufficient for you to say, select and identify lower and higher quality to go in and do intensive qualitative.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any other question? I noticed that a lot of people have.
Yeah, we're out of
had to
time and
head
I know
out.
it's Friday. So thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for speaking with us. It's really great. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.